talk about that connective tissue again. Let's talk about breaking this brisket down. We talk about like all those different collagen-y things and what temperature it's happening. Damian also speaks of like us being able to walk by a brisket and see when it's done. And the reason we can do that is because we don't put thermometers in briskets, right?
No, not unless the foreman is around.
So the temperature is not really doing things. And there's a couple reasons why we wouldn't put a thermometer in a brisket. Like,
well, you poke a hole into the brisket that has been cooking for 14 hours, and it creates a layer of protection on the meat on the inside. At the moment you poke a hole in there, all the juices are going to come out, and then your brisket is going to start drying out from the inside out.
Yeah, so the most important thing for us is the fat. I mean, that's the flavor inside of this brisket. So anything we can do to get this brisket to retain as much fat in it, we're going to do. And so we're not going to jam a pokey object into the middle of this thing to find out if it's done. Like, that's not how we would find out if it's done. What we're looking for is like when this meat's starting to separate on this side, like this. Damian and I, like I said, we can kind of see if a brisket's done from across the room, but a lot of people will check the jiggle and how it moves,
right?
And we'll talk about that with a cooked brisket. And again, the question is, how long do I cook it? You cook it till it's done. It's a good rule of thumb that a brisket is going to take about an hour a pound. It's also a good rule of thumb not to follow recipes that aren't perfect, right? And so, like, it's not 100% perfect science. It's not 100% perfect piece of meat. Again, like, you don't know enough about that animal to know how quickly it's going to cook, right?
Correct.
So, like, this is the cow breast, right? And so if you look at it, it looks somewhat like a chicken breast, only absolutely gigantic. But let's think about that. Have you ever put a chicken breast on the grill and, like, so this little part at the end here, does that ever turn out good? It's always burnt. It should be burnt. If it's not burnt, that's not cooked, right? So one big mistake that a lot of people cooking a brisket at home make is they get it out of the smoker and they cut this off right here and they taste it and they're like, oh, it's perfect. That is fantastic. Let me tell you something. Yeah. If this is perfect, this is There's no question about it. Like, these two things do not go together.
Yeah.
Then you want to ask us how we cut a brisket? What's the first thing we do? Chop that off, chop it up, put it in the beans. Like, we don't serve anybody this part of the brisket. We won't serve anybody that part of the brisket because it's always burnt. It has to be burnt in order for this part to be done. And so that's one big thing that most people, they're like, oh, I cooked a brisket and I cut it and it was perfect. It was so good, and then, and then my friends got over, and it just wasn't the same. And then, is there something wrong with the resting? And I'm like, no, you just tasted the worst part of the brisket, and that's never going to be done properly.
Yeah.
Like, we do not use that. That's trash because it's just too small. I mean, just like a chicken breast, you put a chicken breast on the grill, that little tiny corner in the bottom it needs to be burnt, or that chicken's not done, And so the same thing. This is a cow breast. The thing's not going to cook exactly perfectly. And there is a portion of it that's going to be waste. We use it. We put it in other things. Put it in the beans. Now this here is a fully cooked brisket. This is cooked for about 14, 16 hours. We cooked it until it was done. We didn't put a timer on it. But you'll see, caramelization is important to us. This is a dark piece of meat, and it has been fully caramelized and properly cooked. Damian's going to talk about how to find the doneness, but one big thing that people generally learn from us is they're just not cooking their food long enough. This thing needs to be cooked for a good period of time, and this is what it ends up looking like when it's done. It's dark, and it's caramelized, and it's flavorful, and it's beautiful, right? So this caramelization and this sugar caramelizing and turning dark is an important part of our process. And let's be honest. Like, if I were to cook a strip steak until it looked like this, it would look pretty burnt, and it would probably be pretty burnt. But this caramelization and this beautiful crust on this brisket that's cooked for over 12 hours, maybe over 14, probably around 16, like, this is what we're going for. And it's a hard crust. It's not something that's soft. It's not something that's been steamed. It's important to us. That is the flavor for us. This is not an accident.
No.
This is 100% on purpose. Damian, why don't you talk a little bit about like how we check for the doneness?
Yes, yeah. Like I was saying, on this side of the brisket, all the fat, the big chunk of fat that I was talking to you earlier, this gets so tender. It's one of the toughest fat of the brisket. And when it's done, you'll be able to just put your finger through it. Now it's protecting a little bit with the bark right now, but if you will put your finger in there like you see, it's completely cooked, completely done. That's one of the ways that I figured out when the brisket is done. The other one is when the connective tissue between the lean and the fat is completely done, and you can move it. You can move the top from the bottom, and it has a jiggle. There's a jiggle in there.
That jiggle is part of it, you know, and it is feel. You know, I mean, a lot of people say they stick a thermometer in it. Damian and I feel a brisket, you know. He goes down here on the bottom, I go here just above it, and we're really looking for the same thing. He's looking to see if that's soft. I'm looking to see if it's starting to separate.
Yeah.
You know, and then and then yeah, of course the jiggle.
Yeah. So one way to figure out if it's overcooked, if you spend your afternoon cooking it and then you come back and you're like, oh, I'm wondering if it's done. This side on the brisket, which is not on the flat, you'll be able to take your fingers and then kind of put your finger in between the muscles, but you don't ever do it in the front because this is so lean. Your finger's gonna go through it no matter what at maybe 8 hours. So you have to go somewhere here. You have to feel it. If there is no more fat in between the muscle, that's just gonna be dry. At that point, just run to the store and get some barbecue sauce, chop it, and I don't know, sloppy joes out of it.
Yeah, it's pretty over. I mean, once a brisket's overcooked, it's lost all that fat content that you're trying to hold on to. Once it's lost all that fat content, you can't push it back in there. There's nothing you can do. I mean, there's no amount of butter or bacon fat that's going to fix your problems at that point in time. So yeah, I mean, you're chopping it up and you're saucing it, and you're putting it in some sandwiches. That's about it. If it's underdone, you know, you're not going to get that separation. It's not going to be jiggling properly, you know, and you're not going to have any sort of softness here. And you know, those things is like, you know, those are the keys that we're looking for. If you push this and it's hard, it's not done yet. You got to wait.
Correct.
Chill out, you know.